Matt, take it away.
Hey there, everyone. As Thomas said, my name's Matt. I'm a Navy vet. My undergrad was in international affairs, and I'm working on my history master's at George Washington University. Today, I'll be speaking with you about what I call the Potemkin Paradise, which is the Federation in the 24th century. This is, generally speaking, the next generation Deep Space Nine Voyager era. So why am I talking about this? Well, the Federation of the Next Generation era is held up as an aspirational example for a lot of us. I kind of thought about this after, about once a month I see someone tweet or start a thread on Reddit saying, we could have had Star Trek, but instead we got, Elysium, Warhammer 40K, Mad Max. Some people are into that. So, and why wouldn't you want to live in a federation? It's a society that prides itself on rule of law, sapient rights. Chekhov would say human rights, communitarian ideals in line in foreign policy on a post-scarcity society. The problem is the Federation foreign policy is realist rather than idealistic or enlightened. And the domestic policies tended to follow a failure of living up to these ideals. So I'm going to begin by talking about foreign policy briefly, and I'm going to use that to lead into some of the domestic ramifications of that. First of all, some key foreign policy assumptions. Assumption one is the Federation was kind of the top dog in the Alpha Quadrant, and by this I'm excluding people like the Travelers and the Organians, and this is because of in large part due to their technical advantage. So being the top dog, that gave them a lot of options. In number two, in general, the foreign policy was kind of enlightened, idealistic, and rational. This is manifested through the Prime Directive and great effort being made to in conflict avoidance. So let's talk about the first one, top dog. The Federation was a neo-pair of the Klingons, not the other way around. This is borne out by the performance of the Klingon Defense Force in the various Federation Klingon conflicts, to include, theoretical ones and the Yesterday's Enterprise timeline. And this is further supported by the Klingon Defense Force's performance against other powers, such as quickly overrunning the Cardassian Union and managing to hang on by itself against the Dominion Expeditionary Forces in the Alpha Quadrant. Now, Federation policymakers knew this, and they took advantage of a weakened Klingon Empire after the Praxis disaster to get them on board with an arms control treaty that substantially reduced the sizes of both fleets, and they even went so far as to managing, to a degree, bringing the Romulans in on it with a Treaty of Callan, which is a smaller arms control treaty. The whole Pax Federation of the 21st century was driven by this treaty system. So the problem with that is that once the Klingon Empire had recovered to the point where you had a resurgent expansionist regime under Gowron, and they decided they did not want to be part of the Kenmore Accords anymore. That became a crisis for the Federation, even though you had all these technical advantages. In this, the Federation was not able to translate its technical advantage, if indeed it existed, into military power. Well, what about its enlightened foreign policy in general? Well, I'm of the opinion that the Prime Directive is mostly used as an excuse to wash itself of making decisions and policies. The best example of this, it was just applied into consistently for it to be a real policy. The best example of this was the Federation agreeing to operate Deep Space Nine during Bajor's Federation candidacy period. This is just the most prominent example. There are all others intervening in the Klingon Civil War, stopping stellar objects from hitting planets, what have you. It's just an excuse to avoid making decisions. Second, the Federation routinely violated the territory of other states. I think probably the best example of this is when the Dominion instructed the Federation, hey, stay on your side of the wormhole. The Federation's solution was to take a barely walking tech demonstrator and go on a deep reconnaissance of the Dominion territory. This was something that ticked all the boxes of what the paranoid founders thought of solids. So, again, wasn't enlightened. It was it was kind of a we need to know more about these people realist look. And finally, when the Federation made great efforts to avoid conflict, it was invariably Federation citizens that suffered. So, to the left, we have a Tellurian and a human teenager. This human teenager had been a child on a Federation colonial ward that got bombed flat by the Tellurians if Tellurians adopted them. This is kind of a prominent example of fourth-rate powers like the Tellurians attacking Federation colonies, and there's a brief border war that's mentioned, in the background, and apparently nothing is done about it. If you think this is just a one-off, to the right we have Captain Picard telling the residents of, I believe it's Doran 5, Doran 5, that they need to pack up and leave. We don't want to fight the Cardassians over this, so we agreed to a land swap. You guys had no input on whether or not you wanted to stay and the Federation will stay on this planet. And this is not unique. The Cardassian border along the DMZ was the biggest example of this. In these colonies, well, there wasn't really a post-scarcity society. The desires of the citizens were not taken into account when they made agreements with fourth-rate powers like the Cardassians. Now, so what happened after that? Well, I would say the result of that is that the official Federation policy of treating these marginal worlds as second-class citizens ended up with these citizens taking matters into their own hands. The Maquis were a group along the Cardassian border that decided to fight the Cardassians because they felt, correctly, as it turned out, that the Cardassians were arming their own colonists in the demilitarized zone, and Starfleet, decided to clamp down on it. We saw from this widespread extremism in Starfleet ranks. In fact, we saw, not counting Chakotay's band, which is the group of Maquis that joined Voyager, that was lost in the Badlands, we saw no fewer than 5 commissioned officers not express sympathy for the Maquis, not talk about it in the wardroom, but straight up join the Maquis and provide material help for it. So this extremism ran deep in Starfleet and the Federation's military. And by the way, Starfleet is the Federation's military. And how did the Federation agree to this? Well, one of the things they did was they continued to use Starfleet, which is a military branch, as law enforcement. So to the left, we have some civilians on the colony. I believe it's Volon 3, who are kind of backing away. Cisco's just shown up to tell them, hey, you guys are providing sympathetic to the Maquis. We heard to shake some trees loose. You can't do it. Where are the Maquis? Throughout the Next Generation era, we do not see, as far as I'm aware, one single Federation civilian law enforcement official at the Federation level. There are no Federation marshals. There is no Federation Bureau of Investigation. It's Starfleet. Now, Starfleet, there may be some justification for them to chase, ships around, but when they go to arrest a criminal, it's Starfleet that goes ashore. They don't go to a local constable and have them arrested. It's Starfleet that does the arresting. Jadzia Dax even said that on Risa when you had these extremists who are trying to control, who are disrupting the weather patterns of that. Well, with Starfleet, we can arrest them. Apparently, in addition to being the military, they're also a general army in a paramilitary force that acts as police. Well, what about the justice system? To the right is Rear Admiral Bennett, who was a member of the Starfleet Judge Advocate General Corps, and that is him passing down the sentence to Richard Bucher. Richard Bucher was Julian Bucher, who was the chief medical officer of Deep Space Nine, his father. And his judgment was he was issuing the sentence because when Julian was young, he took him outside of the Federation to be genetically augmented. Now, you can kind of wrap this up into a national security concern because you don't want another Khan Noonien Singh, running around and trying to become ruler of the Federation. But what we are fundamentally seeing is that in the 21st century, this is a society where the military is law enforcement, and the military is frequently acting as the judiciary against civilians. I would not describe either of those as something that we should be aspiring to politically. So I guess if I were to kind of give a bottom line of this whole thing is that, one, treaties will buy you peace, but you better have a backup plan, if the other party doesn't want to continue with it. Two, regarding foreign policy, no matter how enlightened you are, realist policies will always trump idealistic ones, especially in a crisis. Three, the most egalitarian military out there will still see extremism in the ranks. You need to keep a lookout for it. You can't just pretend it doesn't exist. It's bad for your security if you pretend it doesn't exist. And four, military forces and militarized law enforcement and judiciary is not in keeping with these democratic ideals. I'm not saying that the Federation is a bad place to live, far from it. It's just that we need to be careful not to be so blinded by the good aspects that we ignore or downplay the bad, because if we do that, we will never seek to improve, societies, whether fictional or not. I'm Matt Bucher. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and live long and prosper.
Outstanding work, Matt. Thanks you almost converted me into a Star Trek fan. Almost, but not quite.